Welcome in, Agile Mentors. We are back for another episode of the Agile Mentors podcast. I'm with you always, Brian Milner, and today I have Mr. Paige Watson with us. Welcome in,
Thank
Paige.
you.
Really excited to have Paige here. We kind of crossed paths with Paige because of some posts that he had done. He is a technical coach and has been in the development community for a long time and is an XP practitioner, right? Did I hear you correctly?
Yes, I like to use the term code crafter, but yes, a lot of the things
Nice.
I do are XP centric.
I love that, code crafter.
Yes.
Then the post that kind of got our attention was a series of posts actually that Paige had done about really ADHD and software development. And as people who have listened to this show for a while know, we've done a couple episodes around neurodiversity and neurodiverse traits and how that kind of bleeds into our work in the software industry. There's plenty of stats showing that there's kind of a unusually large percentage of people in this profession that have some form of neurodiversity. So, the she and works. The first one I thought was an interesting title. It talked about it being a bug or a feature.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about what kind of got you started in exploring this.
So I go to a 3-day open space that we have in the Northwest. I'm in the Seattle area. And one of the sessions that we had was something, I forget the exact title, but it was around neurospiciness in the workplace. And the whole idea was, let's get a bunch of people who are neurospicy, for lack of a better term, and find out what works for you at work. What are things you need? How do you make sure that what you need is being said out loud? And, how do you make your work better? So this was a great discussion that we had. And I came out of it going, well, a lot of the things that I do, a lot of the practices and processes that I use are actually really helpful for me in my ADHD. So then I sat down and thought, well, first I thought this would be a great conference talk. So I wrote that, right? And then I was like, I bet this would be a great series of blog posts as well. So I wrote those. Yeah. It turns out it is a pretty good conference talk, if I say so myself. I get a lot of really good feedback, and honestly, the discussion after I do the presentation is almost better a lot of the time because you're right. There is a lot of people that sort of, whether they've been diagnosed or they self-identify, whether it's ADHD or autism or anything, there's a lot of that I think we see existing in our area that we don't. I don't want to say it's more. I don't have like a definitive study or anything like that says it's more people in software, but it seems like it. And I sometimes wonder whether that's just me, seeing people because I'm in the software industry, or whether there's a draw towards it.
Yeah, there was a study that because I did a conference talk on neurodiversity and software development a while back too, and there was a study that I found out of the University of Texas that basically the only correlation I could find was saying that their young people who were entering college and choosing majors were choosing. Actually, it was people on the autism spectrum of some kind were choosing careers in computer science at a rate that was 3 times essentially that of the general public. So it's not all the neurodivergent traits, but it is, one flavor of that. I just don't, maybe there's just not a study on the others, but I agree with you. I think just from my experience working in software and managing people in software and developing myself, the people I've kind of been around and worked around, now that I'm more aware of neurodiverse traits, it seems like, oh yeah, that seems very much like this is going on. That seems like that's going on. And it just starts to make sense a little bit more.
Yeah. And I wonder, I kind of look back and I like to play board games a lot. I have a model railroad, and I like the aspect of not just watching the trains go around, although there's probably a meme in there somewhere, but I like sort of operating it like a model railroad. How do I get these cars over there to the grain elevator in the fewest moves? There's a puzzle solving aspect. And one day I was like, I like to do that in my work too. And is that part of the neurospiciness? I don't know, but it's definitely a draw as to why I like development.
Yeah. Well, I want to dive into some of the things that you kind of uncover in your talk and in the blog post that you wrote. What were kind of some of the discoveries that you kind of realized as you were looking into this?
So, like, first off, let me preface by saying I'm not a doctor,
Yeah.
and if you think think you have ADHD or want to know more about it, please talk to your medical provider. That's really important.
Yes.
And I can only really talk for my ADHD because ADHD comes in so many varieties. Yes, there are certain things that happen together, but there's so many sort of comorbid aspects to it that I only really want to talk about mine and touch on some other things I've seen maybe, but just that caveat. Um, what was really interesting is that I used to think that ADHD was about not being able to focus, but it's about not being able to control the focus. Because sometimes I can't focus at all. There's lots of things going on. That whole squirrel, that sort of thing. And then there are other times when I can hyper focus, and this is where my talk comes. My talk I call Focus, Flow, and Cold Coffee. And the whole idea is that I go and sit down at my desk and with a cup of coffee and I'm ready to go and I start typing and I go to take a sip and the coffee's cold. Like, and I forgot to go to lunch again.
Yeah.
So it's not really about not having focus. It's about not being able to fully control where that focus goes. In terms of like the way I work, there's a lot of things that I found I can get really overwhelmed by big tasks. I can get overwhelmed if I'm not sure where to start. I'll do that thing where like, okay, I have my work, I know my story, I've got all the requirements. I sit down at the IDE and I start to think about how am I going to write a test, and I don't know where to start. I know what I need to do. It's not that. It's that it's picking a place to start. And that's really a tough one for me. And then I can get overwhelmed by that. And then or I can get overwhelmed by a large task and not fully understanding all of it. And when I do, I sort of freeze and shut down. And so there's a lot of learning around this that I've found about myself, which has been really nice. Also, having to talk about it to people has been sort of forced me to be a little more circumspect. But there are some really great practices that I found that work really well as well, for me especially, mainly collaborative programming, mobbing or ensemble work. Pairing works as well,
Yeah.
but I find collaborative, like full team programming, to be much more effective. Test-driven development, I really like that, and because I think about the requirements as code. So I write one little requirement and then I make that requirement happen. And then, the test fails because I haven't written the code. And then it passes when I write the code, and hooray, little dopamine hit when it passes. But also, I don't have to go back afterwards and remember the code that I wrote and try and write tests around it. That's a really tough one. Like, I needed to, I was going to remember to test this one thing, but I forget what it was. Now, if I think of my tests as requirements in code format, even the name, the name isn't, should get user. It's that, that sort of, when I pass user ID 1 should return user for ID 1 type of thing. It's a very clear, or when I pass null should throw exception, and they're very small. So again, I don't have to be overwhelmed thinking about this grand architecture and holding on to all the information.
Yeah. What I think is really vital here is because I love how you explain the kind of symptom, right? The symptom that we experience, and then kind of matching that up to say, well, but here's a practice that really kind of counteracts that a little bit. I think you're absolutely right. I experienced the same thing with hyperfocus and not being able to focus. And there is something about having small little chunks of work that makes that so much easier to digest, because it's a constant flow of things. It's not oh my gosh, now I've got to stay with this, for 3 days straight before I get out of it. No, I'm going to do a little bit and then check it, and a little bit and check it. I agree. That's a big problem, I think, as well for people with ADHD, that we kind of can't always remember, what happened
Yeah.
yesterday, because so much has kind of come our way. And it's not that we weren't invested in it when it was there. It's just that, gosh, our brains are trying to keep up with, all the things that are going on. And it just kind of overwhelms our memory processes a little
I
bit.
talk about it like I have my short term, which is my memory buffer, and then I have
Yeah.
my long term, which is my hard drive. And the problem is that the buffer gets flushed really easily. Something new, interesting, something that sparks my interest immediately flushes the buffer. And so a lot of things that are important don't get written to the hard drive and saved for later. And another issue that I've run into is there are times I don't really understand what's important. What's important to me
Yeah.
is not always what's really important to the team, the work, right? To my wife, all that sort of thing. Like,
Yeah.
and so, I'll think like, gosh, I have this chunk of work where I have to add this logging, but if I refactored this into a need-based eventing system, it would be so much better in the long run. Well, the important thing is that the logging get in there. But I don't think about that. I think like, well, the need-based eventing system is the important that in 4 years, that's really where we need to be. And so I'll get excited about that and I won't focus on that. And I'll forget about the buffer will flush. And so being able to do little tiny chunks of work and use whatever I'm a story or whatever I have in terms of my requirements to drive my tests is super helpful because I can look and say, okay, this happened here because I have a test that says this happened. And I have a test that says it didn't happen, what it should happen, what the response should be or the outcome should be if it doesn't happen. That's really like TDD is fabulous for that. Collaborative work is fabulous for this because when I'm driving, I don't get overwhelmed if I'm at the keyboard because all I have to do is listen to what other people are telling me and type. I'm the smart input. When I'm navigating or I'm helping, write the software, I can get stuck. I can get lost. And it's good because my teammates will say, hey, let's just add this little part. I know you want to refactor this into a need-based eventing system, but let's just add this. In fact, I can hear my buddy's voice in my head saying, "Can we just write this little part?" And the answer is, yeah. Okay, great. So there's guardrails on both sides when you work as a collaborative team, which is really excellent.
Yeah, I agree. That part of that hyper focused kind of side effect sometimes is that we our brain turns its attention to something, and it's hard to come back from that edge once you've gone over it. And if you're thinking, oh, it's this needs based event, the system that we need to move to, my brain is now in that
Yes.
mode. And if I don't have that help to say, whoa, 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 hold on, let me pull you back over that cliff edge here. Let's go this direction. I agree that partnering up with someone, pairing with someone, that can be such a vital thing there to kind of help control that a little bit.
Yeah, it really and I mean, there's so many other things. The sort of myopic view versus the 10,000-foot view. It can be really easy for me to get really focused on one little thing. The other people will allow you one, even if that one little thing is what I need to work on. The other people will see how the larger context exists, how the architecture fits together, where I might not be thinking about that. And on the opposite side, when I'm thinking about like, oh, we're going to need this component, we're going to need these 5 components, we're going to need a database. And again, my buddy, we can just start on this little thing. We can just do this little part. So again, those guardrails of not having to hyper focus and not having to sort of scatter and get overwhelmed by the immensity of it all. It really works well.
Yeah, I agree. I want to make sure people listening understand as well, though. If you're hearing this, please don't think, oh, well, if I don't have ADHD, maybe this isn't important to me. Part of the reason we kind of talked about how there's, maybe we're seeing it, maybe there's some studies showing it, that there's a prevalence of these kinds of traits in people that we work with. It's important, I think, to know our own teams, to know how to help the people on our teams. And if there's someone in your sphere that you work with that has some of these traits, then they may not be diagnosed in the way. You don't have to be. If you just notice this is what's going on, well, just a suggestion. Hey, have we considered doing something like this? Has that ever been anything you've tried? That kind of thing can go a long way, I think, just being helpful.
It will. I would be careful,
Yeah.
right? Because it's not my place to say you have this or you're this or whatever. It's totally up to the person, whether they've been diagnosed or not, to self-disclose, right? The really nice thing about this is a great way of working for everybody.
Yes.
Collaborative programming builds a team. It's no longer my code versus your code. It's our code. We built this together. Woody Zuell likes to talk about, the best of my coding ability and the best of your coding goes in. And when I start to write something that's not so great, you go, well, maybe there's a better way, right? And so that sort of lesser coding skill gets dropped out. So the code quality increases just for having multiple people with different sets of knowledge in the room. Not only that, but I start to learn. I'm not a UI guy, but if there's someone who's strong in the UI skills and knows the domain from that side, we work together. Now, if I go work in another mob or, ensemble somewhere else, I can be like, oh yeah, I remember hearing about this and we need to watch out for that sort of thing. And maybe we should pull in another person, as opposed to being totally in the dark. But you start to have that cross-pollination of knowledge, right? That you don't necessarily get by having just stand-ups or knowledge sharing meetings, which is not really knowledge sharing at all.
Right. Right. I appreciate that word of caution, because you're right. I mean, I don't want anyone listening to think, oh, I'm going to go tell someone I work with, hey, it looks like you have ADHD. Like that's not appropriate. But if you see, that's the great thing about these things that can help, is that they're actually good for many reasons. And you don't have to be doing it for this reason. You get plenty of benefits doing it for other reasons. And it just so happens to also help in these other ways. So
yes.
That's a really great call.
Yes. And certainly, so I oftentimes after I do presentations on this or something, there's that question of like, there's this guy at the office who's, obviously got ADHD, but he doesn't know it or whatever. How do I help him? And my answer is, one, you don't. But I mean, a better answer is maybe like, instead of saying, look, you have this issue, we say like, hey, I have some ideas about how we can work as a team in a better way. Can we try them? And whether or not, the person has whatever, like, this is a great way to work as a team. Maybe it helps everybody. So
yeah, I agree. And it's not that, it's not our place to put the name on it, and it doesn't really even need that. It's just kind of recognizing the personality, the traits of the person that you work alongside, and saying, we all have strengths and weaknesses. We all have things we do really well and things that we kind of struggle with. And, you do that for anyone else, right? Anyone else on your team, you'd say, hey, they maybe aren't as good in this area. How can we, help boost them in that area?
Yeah. And while we're on that subject, self-disclosing and having been comfortable with that eventually, slowly, but eventually, a lot of it working on a team where I feel very safe, saying what I am, what I need, that sort of thing, and has been super powerful. And being able, to say, I need to do this, or this would be super effective for me if we could do it this way. Could someone else come and sit with me while I do this? There's a great thing called body doubling that people with ADHD have used. And it's not really someone watching over you or making sure you're on task or whatever. It's a person sitting in the room with you. Just having another person there, whether they're working on the same thing or not, it can be super effective for helping me maintain my focus and continue the process that I'm working on, as opposed to going down rabbit holes or hyper-focusing or whatever. And it's a weird thing that it happens that way. Now, when you work collaboratively, the whole team is doing that, and you're working towards continuing the code forward. But being able to recognize that and being able to say to someone, hey, could you just pop in, even when we're remote, can I just open up a Zoom room and just so we're together here? I'm just going to work on this and you can work on that. That's if you can't mob or you don't mob or you're not pairing or whatever, even that's a good start, a good help. But this idea of being able to be on this team that's comfortable with this allows us, especially when we're mobbing, I have one person I worked with who was very introverted and got that energy got exhausted pretty regularly, especially in the mob. And this guy is amazingly smart, and I love working with him. Okay, every once in a while he'd be like, "I'll be back," and he'd go sit, in a cushy chair in the corner, and quiet time to himself. Great. Nobody in the mob was like, "Where's he going? How come he's not working?" We were all like, yeah, that's what he needs. We can keep going. We can keep moving the code forward. And then he would recharge. He would come back and, we'd keep going with him. And so sometimes, again, if you can get to that point that you feel comfortable and you're in a comfortable surrounding, it can be immensely helpful and allow for the team to continue to grow and do the good work in a way that's effective for you as well.
Yeah, I think that's the big kind of paradigm shift that's happened, is that, for a lot of my earlier career, the kind of attitude in workplaces was the individual adjusts to fit the environment. You had to, change how you worked best and everything else to fit the structure or whatever it was. And now there's much more recognition, and I think very appropriately so, to say, no, we're human beings. We're very different, and no one little cookie cutter mold is going to work for everyone. And we don't want it to. It's actually beneficial that it's not that way, because we want people who can be better at spatial reasoning and others who are more creative. And like, we want the benefits from it. We just, get annoyed sometimes at having to deal with, individual downsides from that as well.
Yeah.
What other kind of tricks that have crossed your plate? What other things have been really helpful to you in programming with ADHD?
Sure. So I talked about collaborative programming. I talked about TDD. Those are both super effective for me. Another one is we use a thing called discovery trees. Discovery trees is a visual representation of tasks to be done. And so, yes, it's sort of like a breakdown of work, a tree of work, but the really important part of it is that it's not an upfront design. It's a last responsible moment practice, which means not last possible moment, but last responsible. It started out with us, we were mobbing and we were like, okay, we got to build this and we got to do that. Oh, we need to remember to add the connection to the database. When somebody would write that down on a sticky note and put it on the window. And, it started with a bunch of sticky notes on the window. Then it moved to, okay, what do we need to do next? What's the next most important thing that the application doesn't do right now? And let's focus on that. So let's connect to the database. What do we need? We would sort of put the connect to the database at the top, and then say, what do we need to do to make this effective? Well, we need the connection string. We need the whatever certificate or all this sort of thing. And we'd list a couple things. And then we'd say, okay, of the 4 things we just listed, is there one we can start on right now? Is there something we can do right now that maybe will take a couple hours to half a day at most? And if the answer is yes, we stopped designing the rest of it. We stopped adding sticky notes under it, and we started focusing on that one thing. If the answer is no, then we'd say, okay, of the 4 things we came up with, what's the most important thing that the application doesn't do right now? Well, okay, it's the connection string. Do we have everything we need for the connection string? We need a username, we need a password, etc. We need a table name, whatever. And so can we start on something there right away? Yes. Okay, let's start on that. And stop designing the rest. And so it was a very quick way of sort of, again, that just-in-time sort of design. And it's super effective because we would start on something and we'd add a little tick up in the corner. And on my blog, I've got pictures of it, but we've got ticks in the corner of stuff that's in process. And then when it's finished, we cross it out, big slash across it. But we can also do this online using whatever whiteboard that you're using for your company. When you look at it and you see like, okay, there's one thing at the top and there's 4 things underneath that. And then underneath each of those has 3 or 4 things. The top 2 things in the first branch are crossed off. And then there's a couple of things from the third branch crossed off. And I say to you, what percent are we done with the work that we know? You can say, well, it's probably more than 50%. Maybe it's about 60, but you can visually see it right away. And it's super easy to kind of say, okay, here's the steps we think we need to go through. Here's the things we need to remember. And if at any point we go, we forgot to do that, we write a sticky and we put it on the tree and we say, is this the most important thing that the application doesn't do right now? And if so, we go work on that. If not, we wait until it is. And there's some really, that law of unintended consequences sort of thing. There's some really exciting things that came out of it. One, we didn't have to do this big upfront design and planning. You should have a roadmap. You should know the direction you're going, obviously. I'm not saying there should be no design, but I'm saying there shouldn't be 2 days of sitting in a room coming up with all the different stories and designs that you have to do over the next quarter or 2 quarters or whatever. Because we all know in 3 months when we get to this work, what's going to happen? We're going to look at it and go, this isn't anything of like, everything's changed since we got here. We still have to connect to the database, but everything has changed. Right? So you need that roadmap, but you don't need to do that design. You can do it at the last responsible moment.
Yeah.
And the visual aspect, one, it allowed me not to get overwhelmed because I could look at it and say, okay, here's the next thing that I have to do. I don't have to worry about all the rest of that. 2, when we had PM, management, leadership, anybody walk by, we could immediately say, we are right there. See how these are crossed off and that isn't, and this one's got ticks in the corner which says it's in progress. We are right there. And then we added some other visualizations like red dots or whatever for blocked, or when we were doing this online, we had blue stickies, which were questions that we wanted to pose to our product people later or whatever. It was super effective at sort of radiating all that information and put that in a place and put the link where everybody can get to it. And, we didn't really have to, there wasn't a lot of time spent trying to explain what was going on to people outside of the team. So
that's one of the such strong points about making things transparent, because when you do that, then you get the added bonus of now people don't need updates. Now people don't need to, we can just point them to that artifact and say, hey, there it is. Go take a look yourself at any time.
Yeah.
I love that. And I love also how that kind of deals with the problem we talked about earlier about we have got this big, huge thing to do. I don't know where to start. Where do I start? There's too many things to do. Well, now just systematically, we're going to go step by step through it. And it gives you that impetus to just get going, right? Get something started.
Towards action.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And the really nice thing is that there were times when we had a tree and someone would be like, hey, we just finished our work. What are you guys doing? And we'd be like, okay, here's the tree. And they would grab one of the unstarted top level ones and say, well, we're taking this over to our board, and they would start on it. And so it was really easy to sort of split the work as necessary or as people were available to work on other things. And we didn't have to worry about like, how do we assign this story and that story and whatnot.
That's great. These are great tips. And like I said, I hope as people listen to this, they're hearing not just, the exact thing to do, but more of kind of the approach to it, to say when there's issues like this, you just kind of experiment with different practices. You try them out and you see how they go, which is what we should be naturally doing anyway. Yeah, this is really helpful. And what we'll do here is make sure in our show notes that we've linked to these posts that Paige put together, because they really are fascinating. If this is something that interests you, I encourage you to read the whole series, because it's like you said, there's some really interesting pictures that kind of walk you through the process and how he went through this. So I really appreciate you, being willing to do that and to share that kind of information with everyone. It's not always easy to, be able to just say to people, hey, this is kind of what I'm going through. But I appreciate you doing it because I know it's really helpful. It's helpful to me, and I know it's helpful to others as well. So I just thank you for being willing to do that.
You are welcome. It's one of the sort of aspects of being a crafter, calling myself a crafter, is I want to spread great practices. I always like to say I don't know the best way to build software, to create software. I know the best way right now. If there's a better way, I love that you were talking about experiments, because we should all be doing them all the time and finding the better way. And these practices, even mobbing and TDD and all, they all came out of like, how do we find the better way? Whoever it was that started them, how do we find the better way? Discovery trees, I'm hearing people using them all over the world now, and they're like, this is great. Like, that's good. If it works for you and it's really effective, then do it, because, we want to get rid of those things that are holding us back, whether it be processes or practices or sort of ways of working that aren't super comfortable for who we are as people. Let's change that. Let's do it a better way. Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, Paige, I can't thank you enough. Thanks for making the time for this and sharing your insights with us. I really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, thank you. And I enjoyed this a lot.